Hello and welcome back to the One Take Show. In this episode, we are in conversation with Ms. Ankita Singh. Ma'am is the co-founding partner at A&P Partners. Ma'am has previously advised many clients in different forums across the country dealing with issues of intellectual property, dispute resolution, criminal law, and various other such areas of laws. In this episode, we talk about Ma'am's experience with law, her advice for law students, the fresh law graduates, and her experience of co-founding a full-service law firm. Apart from this, we also talk about a very interesting topic, that is the Advertising Standard Council of India, the ASCI's new guidelines on the advertisement for the influencers. Yes, we all know that social media influencers, which are popping up every day in different platforms, are advertising different things. So obviously this requires a conversation, and this entire episode is premised upon a brilliant opinion that has been authored by Ma'am, which is linked down in the description. So please make sure to check it out as well. And if you like this conversation, which I'm sure you will, please make sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel. If you have any suggestions or feedbacks, write them down in the comment section. I would love to read them. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's start the podcast.
You want something, go get it. Period.
We're recording. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the One Take Show. I am really grateful that I have this opportunity to speak with you. And I am really looking forward to this conversation because obviously, like any other law student, I have also been following your work, and the inspiration is constant. We try to learn as much as we can. But I think these kind of conversations give us an opportunity to learn more about what you have been working on and what your experience has been. So thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Costa, for having me. I am really humbled, and I have been seeing your work. I have seen some of your recent work, and I must say you're doing an amazing job. So keep that up. I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It means so much, like for someone who's starting this podcast and having these conversations on a regular basis, to have this kind of appreciation itself is, I think, the biggest form of validation. So thank you so much for that. Before we get into the conversation and the amazing theme that we have, I'm really curious about it. I think a lot of inspiration can be drawn from your own personal experience. So if you could please tell me, what was it that got you into the law, and what was your experience in the initial years in the legal industry?
So, Costa, that's of course charting a very long journey that it's almost over a decade that I've been in the industry now. I belong to a very small town in Assam. So if I have to chart it from that from where I belong and where I am today, I'm practicing in Mumbai. I'm with the Bombay Bar. It's quite a long journey that I've come in 10 years. My experience with law would be, it will be wrong to say that, I always wanted to be a lawyer. That's not something that I always wanted to be. I did not know, honestly, like most of us, early on in our career, don't know what we want to be. And my condition was the same. I did not know where my career would take me, where in that trajectory, where I would land up. But I always knew that I was a people's person. I always knew that, I wanted to be in an industry which is client oriented. Now, that could be law, that could be journalism, that could be anything that, that has opening for an individual to interact with clients or interact with people. So I knew that. In that process, I happened to take up law as my career path, of course, because my father said at that point in time, okay, go ahead and take law. And I did that, and it's turned out to be a blessing for me now. So yes, so that's how I picked up law. And once I started onto the journey, what it was in the early years, it's not something that it is now. A lot has changed from when I started to where I am. And I am not talking about a 20-year or 30-year experience. I'm just talking about 10 years. So from that perspective, when I started out, media wasn't all that, media and entertainment law wasn't all that catching up at that point in time. It was still, there were very few media and entertainment lawyers in the industry. IP laws exist, of course, since time immemorial, but we did not know so much about it because, of course, IP was a very niche area. But right now, when we talk about IP, you talk about data, you talk about, influencer marketing, you talk about consumer protection. So anything and everything right now is linked. But earlier on, it was not the case. So I have my journey with law. If you ask me, it's been over 10 years. I have seen a lot of change. So from that perspective, yes, I think it is change oriented is what my journey would be.
Wonderful. And I think on a very similar line, I had a recent conversation with Ms. Savendran, and she is the senior legal counsel for Vice Media right now. And she also spoke about how media law is something that even today is at such a nascent, at such a stage where it's evolving every day. There are different aspects of it. There's no organized structure, but there is an interplay of a lot of laws that come in. So I'm really curious, like when you get into the industry and then subsequently after a very significant experience you decide to start your own law firm and ANP Partners becoming what it is today. What was that experience like? I'm really curious what helped you decide that you wanted to go towards this, and what were the major takeaways from this experience?
Correct. So Kaustubh, when I started as a normal. I got a placement offer when I was in college, and I joined one of the top tier firms at that point in time, and I was working with them for almost three and a half years. In that journey, I had a brilliant mentor, of course, who gave me a lot of exposure to all different kinds of work. And it was not that I was working on a specific project on the civil side or a specific project on the criminal side, but I was working on a bouquet of different kind of laws. And thanks to him that he's given me that exposure. But yes, so that's how that the knowledge came in when I was in that 3 years in the firm. And then I realized that, where does this trajectory take me? Whether I am okay to be here, take on becoming a senior, becoming a principal, then becoming a partner, or do I have the risk appetite right now to take that leap of faith and figure it out? One thing I knew for sure, that I don't have the fear of failing in public. Oh my God, what will the public say if I am seen that my firm does not run well? I did not have that fear. I knew that, even if I fail, I have a career which will back me, and I can go back to firms and I will get a job. So that's something, that security I had in my head, that all right, I have practiced for three and a half years, 4 years. I will get a job at any decent firm, if not, tier one. So yeah, so that's where I took a leap. And of course, in the process, I if you are aware, I run the firm with Priyanka, who is my friend for over 15 years now. So I, of course, had a partnership which was, which is something that anybody would want or crave for. And of course, the family support. So yes, meaning that's I took the leap of faith, I took the risk. And my only advice to anybody who wants to do that is that, do not procrastinate on the thought that whether I should do it, whether I could do it. Just go ahead and do it. Don't fear the failure. Don't fear the failure of failing in public, because that's something that holds you on, and that's something that one should not be scared of, is what my advice would be.
I think this kind of an idea itself is so fascinating, especially for me. I am in a final year of my law school, and there is a typecast sort of a career trajectory that is sort of pre-decided for the students, where we are supposed to join a law firm or a chamber, and if not litigation, and we restrict ourselves to just the firm life, we have a trajectory set that we work as an associate, senior associate, and then subsequently find our way beyond that. And that somehow limits this entrepreneurial idea that one must have. And I'm sure that must have been really challenging for you.
It was very challenging, Kaustubh, and like you said, I echo what you say, because today, once you are in the industry, or you are, studying as a law student, you only know that this is the trajectory that I have to follow. That, I have to join a good firm, I have to get good internships, I have to bag a good job, and then, maybe my growth is in that firm. There are not many people who have taken that leap of faith and moved out, now, meaning when in past 4 to 5 years, when I go back and look, there are a lot of new firms which have come up, but it wasn't the case 10 years back. So if you ask me that whether there was a lot of precedent to look back to, the answer would be no. At my time, no, there wasn't many. There were some very good new age firms, but so to say, startups, there weren't many, which we are today. So yeah, so one must take that leap of faith is what I feel. One must have the appetite of taking. It's easier said than done, Kaustubh, because of course, today it's worked out, and that's the reason why I'm saying this to you. But there is no harm in taking that, that leap and figuring it out if it's working out. It's a very, very challenging journey, trust me, to bag that one client, to know where the opportunity is and to hit that opportunity at the right time with maintaining all the competition around and cutting them off, and then trying to get the client is something that is not an easy task. But once you bag that client, it is your doing. It is from the scratch up, you have done it. So it is your victory at the end of the day, and that victory is very, very sweet. So, well, it's all worth is at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I'm sure, I think over a period of time, this change in the narrative in itself is evident of the fact that now people are, first of all, recognizing it, and also to some extent are more courageous and are taking example from the people who have already set a precedent. I had a very interesting conversation with Mr. Anirudh Sogi, Ikigai Law Firm's founder, and I think it is important for me that I ask you this question also, so as to draw a parallel juxtaposition of how this principle works. What he suggested was that in today's day and time, for anyone who's establishing a law firm, it's important that they find their niche instead of specifically looking for a very generalist perspective, because there are a lot of behemoth law firms who are generalists in nature, already pre-existing. So do you echo this idea, or do you think it is important that these law firms... Okay, so
absolutely,
I would love to know your comments.
And I would totally agree with Anirudh on that, because the specific knowledge in a sector is something that is developed. It is not something that will... So all of us learn basics of law during our law career, or in college and when you pass out. But specific knowledge is something that you will need to teach yourself. Now, when I say you'll need to teach yourself, is do your higher education, maybe by reading, but you will need to chart out a path for yourself which is very, very specific. Maybe you are a media and entertainment lawyer, maybe you're IT, maybe you're a IBC practitioner, but you need to chart out a specific knowledge area for yourself. When I say that, I do not say that you need not know the rest of it. Of course, you and in today's day, it is not that you can go to court, stand there, just know the basics of CPC and fight out a matter. That's not how it works. Even if I am an IP lawyer, I need to know CPC. I need to know Evidence Act. I need to know the in and out of intellectual properties. So it is a bouquet of all of those laws that come. Yeah, but when you say specific knowledge, yes, it is something that one needs to teach themselves to more so run your own enterprise. So that is very much required. Right.
Especially, I think this also, to some extent, it translates to the fresh aspirants, or also the final year law students, or the law students who are ready to enter the industry, essentially, that they find that one niche that they believe they could specialize in, so that they can actually find that unique USP to sell. Do you concur with that?
Absolutely. That one uniqueness to your career, trajectory is very, very important. Unless you don't have that, there is no path set for you. So you are everywhere. You are doing this, you're doing that. And of course, as a law firm, A&P Partners is a full service law firm. So we are not a a boutique IP practicing law firm, although I specialize in IP, but it is not a boutique IP practicing law firm. But yeah, as a individual who's practicing law, you need to know that what interests you, and then channel all your energy and your intellect towards that subject. So that is very much required, I feel.
Perfect, right. And I think to some extent, I think I've also watched your webinars where you've spoken about research and drafting, and all the various students who've actually made notes out of it and have circulated. I think this is absolutely wonderful. But my last set of questions would be that if someone's actually trying to find a place in a law firm like yours, and they also want to somehow create their own niche, but also need to find a mentor like you did, what could be your suggestion for those law students, as in what is it that they could do to perhaps follow your footsteps in a way or the other?
So, Kaustubh, everybody has their own path to chart. So it is not a specific formula that 1 plus 1 is equal to you will become so and so. So that it doesn't work that way. But yeah, if I am to advise someone who is passing out or who is passed out and trying to bag a job, and we are in this black swan moment right now, there is a scarcity that has appeared in the industry. My only advice would be that comprehension, the communication skills, your ability to the ability to impress someone who is sitting in front of you with your communication skills become the most and the first important asset of all the other skills that you will have. And once you have that, because it's a client driven business, so today, and with changing times, we have had clientele who would want the answer on the go. Earlier what used to happen, email aata tha, you look at the email, then you'll respond. That's not the case anymore. The clients are very well aware of what they're talking, and I'm talking about GCs of big companies. They read, and even private clients, they read. Google search engine is so easily available that people will read and come to you. They know the answer. They just want to hear it from you. So at that point in time, the ability to think on your feet is something that is very much required. Having said that, I am not saying that go ahead and give wrong answers. That's not what I'm saying. But know how much liberty you can take in a situation like that, and yeah, the ability to think fast is something that will of course add as an incentive to the career trajectory that you're looking at.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think every law student would definitely want to somehow pick something out of it or the other suiting to their own interests. And I think in totality, this advice works for everyone. And everyone
Correct.
who's trying to find their, opportunities, or because there's obviously one very staple advice that you read law and be good at law. That's one
Correct.
part of it.
Correct.
The other is that what you've just told, that you need to be good at comprehension, you need to be good with client dealing, you need to be good at
Correct.
working in a firm and all. So that's absolutely wonderful, and thank you so much for answering that.
And also, Kaustubh, one more, just a single addition.
Absolutely, yeah.
I of recently I have been seeing there's a lot of distress and this rush call regarding getting an internship, with so and so, or that honestly, it of course is 90% or 80% of your career, but it is not going to determine your career. So it is something that you will need to, it's important to intern, I'm not saying no, but do not just pressurize yourself too much into it that you lose the North Star, and you don't know what exactly you're looking at, and it's just the internship, anything and everything that you're getting, you're bagging it. That shouldn't be the approach, according to me.
Right. I think I'm going to ask you a very weird follow-up on that, and I'm aware of how weird this is going to sound. But if you were to talk to yourself perhaps a couple of years back in today's context, and you were to advise yourself that this is the way you should look at internships, because this is a very curious interpretation that I've just heard, that you need to not rush for the larger of the names, but specifically look how it is going to somehow look at your career in totality. What would your suggestions be to yourself?
So my suggestion would be to myself, looking few years back, is that follow your intellectual curiosity, and just if a place is satisfying you with the kind of work they are giving you, do not go rushing for 10 different places, because it will add on to your CV, because what you will learn at that one place is going to change the graph for you than 10 different places, because it, and I'm sure you are aware that it takes good 10 days to adjust in a place, and then start working, and by the time you start working, it is time for you to leave. So it shouldn't, I would not advise an approach like that. If a place is giving some fuel to your intellectual curiosity, you are getting good work, you are getting to do what you like to do, you are learning more, so then stick to that place. Go all out to figuring out that this is where I want to be. Speak to your senior, pester him, pester her, saying that I want to be here for another 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, want to come back, and go ahead and do that. I mean, that would be my advice, and I did that at that point in time, and so yeah, I would suggest one should do that.
Right. And I think this also translates to the kind of juniors that you look for your firm, like the similar characteristics.
Absolutely. Right. And for looking for a junior for the firm, sincerity of course is a must. That's something that cannot be compromised. Sincerity is the most important thing. Other than that, yes, I do not look at the CV as to, what big names do you have on your CV. Of course, that's not my recruiting criteria. What I look at is how good you are at your basics, and also the ability to tell me in that interview that, all right, if I don't know the answer to this question, I will maybe, look at it, and if I'm called for the second round, I will revert back. So if you have that sort of, strength to sit in front of me and tell me this, I feel that that's a win for me.
Right. I think this makes so much sense, because I'm sure as someone who's at such a senior level, you must, like anyone else who is at pedestal right now, would receive so many messages, so many emails, so many CVs, and there needs to be one standing out point. That level of honesty and sincerity, even in the application process, needs to be translated.
Absolutely.
Right.
No, absolutely, Kaustubh. And from that perspective, like I said, that the ability to acknowledge what you are is something that is, that's a game changer, at least for ANP partners. I don't know for the rest, but for us, if you can acknowledge who you are, if you know the answer very well, if you don't know the answer, you are not faffing. You are telling me, all right, I don't know this. I probably have not worked on it. Probably I have not read about it. And I will get back to you if you need the answer, or, if I am. So if an answer like that comes across, it is a win-win for me at the end. So, that candidate would be like the top list candidate for me.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think after this episode, there are a lot of applications that they're rushing towards ANP partners, especially with this characteristic flowing in, which I think is a huge improvement when it comes to application process that usually happens. I think if we keep having conversation on this, it will become a rabbit hole. I won't stop, because I'm learning so much out of it. But there is a very fascinating concept that I genuinely want to learn more about, and this comes from an opinion piece that you authored, and which I think is something very new, something that I was not personally aware of, at least. And I think a lot of people should know about this, especially now since everyone sort of shows interest towards technology, law, and digital presence and all of that. So there's this one principled opinion piece that you shared, that was the ASCI guidelines for the influencers. And before we get into the details or the specifics of the same, if I could ask you, what do you conceptually see or observe about these recent guidelines that ASCI has come out with? And what is the rationale behind these guidelines?
So, Kaustubh, the advertising market in India was not very, it is not very well regulated. There is not a very stringent law that governs the advertising market. Every sector has its own, sort of specific guidelines. For drugs and cosmetics, there is one. For cable TV, there is one. So then every sector has its own specific guidelines, but there is no mother body, or there was no mother body earlier which existed, which, went ahead and saw whether it was actually a advertising that was going out, or it was a propaganda that was going out. So that's something that, there was nobody to oversee it. Our government in 1985 decided, all right, that we need a, organization to oversee this. So ASCI came into picture. Of course, from 85 till about 2020, 2021, there is vast change we are looking at. What we looked at that time was Doordarshan and Prasar Bharati. What we look at today is, maybe you and I open our Instagrams and see, these influencers putting up these posts and products getting sold. So the change that has happened is wide scope. Now, with the wide scope change, one, I believe that these guidelines should have come way earlier, because all of this has been in existence since about 2013-14. But yes, but sooner than later, it is always better if it's come out now. I feel that it still needs to be a little more stringent. It needs to be a little more watertight. But I'm glad that it has come out at the time it has come out. Also, it is a move at the time when the rest of the platforms, or rest of the like you say, intermediary guidelines, we are all hearing about what is happening. Cable television amendments have come out. So I think it's a part of that, sink of a bouquet, which is coming out now, and we'll see one guidelines coming out slowly. And this, of course, is a very, very welcome move, according to me.
Right, right. And you specifically list down those objectives which were envisaged in these guidelines. And my first question is, since you mentioned that these guidelines are sort of a little off time because all these developments are in existence at this moment.
Correct.
Do you think that these guidelines actually have that potential to realize those objectives? Because it's very difficult to regulate these things, especially on digital front. We see how IPR laws are every day butchered on a digital field. It's very difficult for anyone to regulate them. When it comes to advertising, especially ASCI guidelines, do these objectives have a potential to be realized?
Whether it has the potential of being realized or no is a secondary question, I feel. But what I feel primarily is that for whatever, limiting the misinformation that is presently existing, it will of course curtail it a bit. That of course is going to happen. Whether it will, eradicate it entirely, I don't know. We'll have to see. And the guidelines are pretty robust, but we'll have to wait and see how it is implemented. And these are all self-regulating guidelines. So at the end of the day, for any authority to go behind and go behind the influencer and see that, okay, you are not complying by it, so and so needs to be done, it's going to be a little bit of an uphill task. But I feel that it is going to limit the misinformation that is happening to a certain limit, which is of course a very welcome move. But for your viewers, who are listening this podcast, maybe you want to clarify what an influencer generally is, or who an influencer generally is. Maybe you are Kaustubh of all, because you are running a podcast, and you have access to the audience, you can make a change, so you could be an influencer. So from that perspective, jokes apart, the Bombay High Court, in one of its orders very recently, in 2019, have determined the definition of who the influencer would be. So one needs to now realize that, if I have the access to the audience, I am somebody who will make a change, and that could be an artist on Instagram, on any social media for that matter. That could be a micro level sort of influencer. So any and everybody who can make a change is going to be determined as an influencer, and these rules are going to be applicable to them.
Right. I can't believe I almost skipped that very important part. Exactly what is the definition of an influencer? Because then it would be required to have a metric to measure who qualifies as an influencer, like a certain number of followers or the verification from the platforms. Let's say the blue tick that appears, is that an influencer or not? That's a very interesting question. Please, yes.
Yeah. So the if you happen to read that judgment, it is Marico Limited versus Abhijit. It's one of these YouTubers who had picked up one of Marico's products. I think it was Parachute Oil, if he had picked it up, and he had done a review about it. And the review was, of course, saying that Parachute Oil is not 100% natural sort of coconut oil, which Marico, of course, had an issue with, and they moved the court for injunction. The High Court, I think it was Justice Kathawala's bench, which of course went ahead and gave an injunction in favor of Marico. But I think that order is now challenged. But nonetheless, they have defined what an influencer would be. And what they say is that, somebody who has a certain number of followings, the number is of course not defined, but in a reasonable sort of mind frame, what would be your access or your reach to the audience is what an influencer would determine. So it is for you and I to determine who is an influencer. Maybe, 5,000, 10,000 followers is something, be considered as an influencer. And if these product guys are reaching out to them to go ahead and promote their product, of course they are influencers, and we go back and see their products.
Right. I think this is definitely that I need to personally study also, and I will be linking all these things down in the description along with this article that we are talking about right now. So if anyone wants to sort of read or catch up on it and want to further research and explore, can always access these resources. Apart from that, ma'am, I think there is one very important factor that you mentioned in the article itself, and which I genuinely want to understand in a sense where I could very limited extent was what my understanding was to this, is the material connection that needs to be drawn. And you've talked about it in the article where you said that material connection is a lever fulcrum point, which sort of determines whether these guidelines are applicable or not, and in what manner are these guidelines applicable. So could you please tell me a little bit more about that?
So let me give you a very simple example. Now today, if I pick up a product, say a beauty product, and I say that, all right, use this cream that I am promoting, and I put it up on my Instagram saying that, okay, I have used this cream, and it seems like it doesn't give me sort of it fares my skin, if that be the point. If I am doing it, first of all, whether I am an influencer or no, we saw earlier whether you will be categorized or whether I'll be categorized as an influencer or no. So that is one level of it. The other level of it is that today, if a brand has approached me and a brand has told me that, okay, you promote my product, in return, I am going to give you money. That is where material connection arises. Now, when I say money, it could be kind. Now, I'm sure you are aware, and in our day and age, everybody is aware that these influencers are called to various hotels and various, resorts, and, for various functions, just to be there and promote it. And maybe in the barter, they get the tickets free or they get the hotel stay free. So any exchange in cash or kind is going to be a material connection that is developed between both the parties. And when that happens, these guidelines are going to be applicable to them.
Right, perfect. And I think that also comes with an issue of legal compliances, which these influencers have to specifically go through. And what are those legal compliances that you've talked about in the article?
So if you are an influencer who, in the capacity of influencing the public, are materially connected to a company or whoever's product you are advertising, what you will need to do is run your due diligence. That is, when I say run your due diligence, is to see that whether, if say you are running a crypto platform, say if you're promoting a crypto platform on your Instagram, and you're running those ads saying that, okay, go to so and so platform and buy, and I have bought and I have used. And in these Instagram, generally, how it is that you show it in your daily lives that, okay, you have been doing it, so the rest of the public should do it. That's how the marketing is actually targeted. If we talk about a crypto platform today, if I am the influencer, I need to know, one, whether the crypto platform is a registered platform, whether it has the license to go ahead and do the run the exchange on the platform. That is one. Secondly, I need to know whether the laws in our country provide for it also or no, whether the RBI allows it. Luckily in our country it does, but I need to be aware. And this is a very basic example, but when I'm talking about, like, some examples, like if I'm promoting a hotel, and that hotel seems to be not having an environmental clearance, or does not have a OC but has already started it could be anything. So I need to run my basic diligence that I don't get into trouble. And it's not like these laws didn't exist earlier. Brand ambassadors always got into trouble for misleading information that went out. So brand ambassadors are always going to be in trouble, and the intention of these guidelines are that only, that if I am an influencer, you become the brand ambassador for the brand, so you have to be liable for it.
Right. And just to understand this sort of a diligence, is it to be done from a perspective of a rational person, as our courts understand it, or does it have to go the proper diligence that requires a legal assistance?
No, so there are 2-3 ways that one can look at doing the diligence. Of course, one is, of course, have a lawyer who can advise you as to what needs to be done. That is one. The second is that always now, because these guidelines now very specifically say that if you are running an ad, you put saying that it is sponsored, or it is ad, hashtag sponsored, whatever. So all of those things need to be disclosed. So when you are doing it for a company, what you need to do is your agreements need to be in place with them. See, I personally, as an influencer, will not know whether that hotel has all the approvals or no, whether there is a fire approval that they have or no, whether they have the fire NOC. And if they're coming to me saying that, okay, I'll give you one night stay and you promote my hotel, I'm not going to ask them whether you have the fire NOC or no. That's of course not practically possible, and they will get cheesed off and my business goes. So what one needs to do is, the agreement that they enter with these brand guys, the agreement need to very specifically in the representation and the warranty specify that, all right, I am, giving you a representation that I am compliant with all laws. And tomorrow, if something goes wrong, I am to indemnify you. So there has to be an indemnification clause and there has to be that representation that has to be there. So if these two things are taken care of tomorrow, even if somebody gets up and says that, all right, this hotel was not compliant and, I am going to make you a party to the suit, the brand has to take care of the legal expense, take care of your protection. So you are protecting yourself, and this is also from the influencer's perspective, very very valid guideline that has come up. So it's win-win for both, I feel.
Absolutely. And what happens when there is a non-compliance? So when you previously said that the laws with respect to advertisement are not very stringent in our country, and
Yes.
they need to sort of also have some consequences that would create an effect. So in this situation, when there is a non-compliance, what are the consequences? Are they harsh enough or are they strict enough to render the results that they want to?
Yeah, they are. So today, say for example, I am promoting a product which costs 400 rupees per product. My agreement with the and most of these influencer agreements work on commission basis, that you promote 10 bottles for me or 10 dabbas for me, and whatever commission we get, we'll pay you that commission. Of course, there's some fixed fee at times and all that. Now, in lieu of that, you don't want a fine of 10 lakh coming your way. You don't want that to happen. So, the remedy today, if I have to create an issue against an influencer, what I just need to do is whatever is the lapses that they have not followed, I will go and file a consumer complaint. That is one. There is a Consumer Council amendment that has come, which is for misinformation and wrong advertising. So, under that amendment and that regulation, my right remains that I can run to court and claim for whatever damages I want to. Whatever damages, meaning about 10 lakh is the cap for the damage. So I honestly don't think that anybody will want to attract that sort of sort of penalty their way. So yes, the penalties, if you ask me, is harsh. Yes, one, because your time energy goes in the litigation. Two, because if they win, then of course that money is to be paid by you if you don't have your agreements in place. And there's a brand, if you don't have the brand agreement in place, the brand will say you go ahead and pay because you are made a party. So from that perspective, diligence becomes very important.
Absolutely wonderful. I think as we conclude this conversation, I have to ask you this: like in today's scenario, you see that these influencers are today becoming a rage with the growth of these platforms, and they're becoming a very strong force, especially when it comes to advertisement. Everyone is promoting something or the other. That's, I think, their major source of income also. In today's time, how do you see and conceptually sort of, if you are to summarize this entire discussion around the ASCI guidelines, how would you conceptualize it in your interpretation of its applicability in today's time?
So we are looking at a very disorganized sort of industry right now. The influencer market industry is very, very disorganized. Today you and I may know some of these major influencers on Instagram, but there are a lot of micro influencers who exist and who one is not aware of. And maybe they are not going to know about these guidelines existing till they get into trouble. So what is materially important to do is to get out on these social media platforms. These social media platforms should run the guidelines on their pages saying that, okay, these are the compliance that needs to be done. Maybe their terms and conditions can say, but nobody goes and reads the terms and conditions. So there has to be a advertising of these rules that has to happen for people to know that exactly what is existing, because we are looking at a very, very disorganized sector, meaning there is micro influencers all across now. When TikTok existed, we know how many micro influencers. Now all of it is now all shifted to Instagram. So there are quite a few that exist. So from that perspective, one need to be, it needs to be, the message needs to go out, the messaging needs to be correct about it.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, ma'am, for sort of explaining this in such depth, because I think anyone who's listening to this will find this very curious. And I think the biggest part about this conversation is that this is something that we all know exists. We all see those small icons on YouTube videos which say this is a paid partnership. On Instagram, they say it's a paid partnership, but we never really understand what it means and what are the legal structures that exist. Especially being a law student, it's absolutely imperative that we be aware of these rules and regulations and the guidelines that come out. So thank you so much for talking about this. Before we wrap this up, ma'am, do you have any closing remarks for our viewers?
So it's a pleasure to be talking to you today, Kaustubh. So that's of course it's been a good discussion that we had. Some sort of suggestion that I would say, follow your heart, do what you like, follow your intellectual juices, and you'll reach where you reach. So that's what my advice would be. That follow your heart at the end of the day.
Wonderful, wonderful, ma'am. I think listening to this, especially from seniors who've already established so much in their career, in their lives, is very reassuring for anyone who's struggling with so much uncertainty that is around us, especially with the condition of market right now and how everyone is trying to find the best for themselves. So thank you so much for this conversation, ma'am. And I'm sure, I think I've already taken a lot of your time, but I am really grateful for this opportunity, for you taking time out and sitting down with me. And thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you, Kaustubh.